Crossed lines, Stella Navarro sank into her couch, muscles aching after a 14-hour shift. The ambulance siren still echoed in her ears, a phantom wail that followed her home after particularly difficult days. Today qualified, 3 cardiac arrests, a 5-car pileup, and a premature birth in a department store bathroom. Her hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline crash. She needed to call her brother Diego about canceling their weekend hiking plans. Her body wouldn't recover in time. Squinting at her phone through exhaustion, Stella tapped at the screen, her finger slipping on the last digit. Hello? The voice that answered wasn't Diego's familiar warmth, but something altogether different. Measured. Precise with an unexpected gentleness. Sorry, wrong number, Stella mumbled, thumb hovering over the end button. Wait, the voice said. Something in its tone made Stella pause. You sound distressed. Are you all right? Under normal circumstances, Stella would have hung up immediately. Strange men asking personal questions deserved nothing but a swift disconnect. But there was something disarming in his voice, a hesitation that suggested he was as surprised by his question as she was. Just tired. Long day saving lives and all that? She gave a weak laugh. I'm a paramedic. That's remarkable, he replied. I can't imagine what that's like. Blood, chaos, paperwork. Not always in that order. She surprised herself by continuing the conversation. What about you? What's your day like, mystery wrong number? A pause. Meetings, decisions, more meetings. None of it particularly life or death, unlike yours. Everyone's work matters in some way, Stella said, leaning back into her couch cushions. Unless you're a professional puppy kicker or something. He actually laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise even him. I assure you no puppies are harmed in my line of work. That's a relief. I'm Stella, by the way. Another pause. Julian. Well, Julian, I should probably let you go. Sorry about the misdial. No apologies necessary. He hesitated, then added, Actually, it was refreshing. Everyone who calls me wants something. Stella understood that feeling all too well. And I just wanted to cancel a hiking trip. Lucky hiking trip, Julian replied. Enjoy your rest, Stella the paramedic. After they hung up, Stella stared at the unfamiliar number. Something about the brief exchange lingered with her, the rare sensation of being truly heard by a stranger. Across the city, Julian Mercer sat in his penthouse office, gazing at the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. As the founder of Horizon Technologies, his time was meticulously scheduled in 15-minute increments. This unexpected call was the first unplanned human interaction he'd had in weeks. Julian had developed revolutionary privacy software that made him billions before age 35. He understood data, algorithms, and systems perfectly. People, however, remained a mystery, one he generally avoided. Social anxiety and trust issues had only intensified with wealth and fame. Yet this paramedic's voice, direct, unguarded, expecting nothing, had momentarily broken through his carefully constructed isolation. When his phone rang again minutes later, he surprised himself by answering immediately. Julian, it's Stella again. I just realized I should make sure you're not an axe murderer before I go revealing my occupation to random wrong numbers. He found himself smiling. No axes in my possession, I promise. Good enough for me, she replied, her laughter carrying through the connection. Good night, then. For real this time. Good night, Stella. Julian placed his phone down carefully as if it contained something fragile. For the first time in years, he felt a curious sensation, the simple pleasure of an unexpected connection, unburdened by expectations or agendas. Neither knew it then. But that accidental call had crossed more than just phone lines. It had bridged 2 isolated worlds that would never be the same again. Voice in the dark 3 weeks had passed since Stella's misdial, and what began as an accident had evolved into a nightly ritual. Every evening around 11, when Stella finished her shift and Julian concluded his work, their phones would connect them across the city. Tonight, Stella sat on her small balcony overlooking the Eastern District, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. We had to deliver a baby in an elevator today, she told Julian, still processing the event. Mother was a lawyer, went into labor during a deposition. Kept apologizing for inconveniencing everyone while pushing out a human being. Julian's soft laughter came through her earbuds. Sounds like the kind of person my company would hire. What exactly does your company do? Stella asked, realizing how little she knew about his professional life. Julian hesitated. He'd carefully avoided specifics, knowing that Horizon Technology's prominence would immediately change the nature of their conversations. Data security, he said finally. We create systems that protect people's information. So you're basically a digital paramedic, Stella concluded. Saving people from identity theft instead of cardiac arrest. The comparison warmed him. I've never thought of it that way. In his minimalist penthouse, Julian paced as they talked, something he did only during their calls. These conversations with Stella had become the highlight of his days, an anchor in a life otherwise dictated by shareholder expectations and innovation deadlines. My brother thinks I'm having a secret affair, Stella continued. He can't understand why I'm always rushing home to take a mystery call. Am I causing problems? Julian asked, genuinely concerned. Not at all. Diego's just being nosy. He doesn't understand that sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who isn't entangled in your daily life. She paused. It's like you're this voice in the dark that helps me process everything. Julian stopped pacing. That's exactly how it feels. Over subsequent nights, their conversations deepened. Julian found himself sharing childhood memories he'd never told anyone, growing up with parents who viewed emotional expression as weakness, finding refuge in computers that operated on predictable logic. Stella described her immigrant parents' sacrifice to provide opportunities, the crushing pressure to succeed that drove her relentless work ethic. Does it bother you that we've never met in person? Julian asked one night, surprising himself with the question. Stella considered this. Sometimes I wonder what you look like, sure. But there's something special about this. No visual judgments, no preconceived notions. Just two voices connecting. What she didn't say was how much she'd come to depend on these calls, how she found herself mentally composing stories throughout her day to share with Julian, how his perspective helped her navigate the emotional weight of her work. For Julian, these conversations represented an unprecedented freedom. With Stella, he wasn't Julian Mercer, the tech genius whose awkwardness became fodder for business magazine profiles. He was simply Julian, a man with thoughts and feelings that someone actually wanted to hear. One particularly difficult night, after losing a teenage patient despite 20 minutes of resuscitation efforts, Stella called Julian sobbing. I can still feel his pulse disappearing under my fingers, she whispered. Julian listened, helpless across the distance. I wish I could do something, he said finally. You are, Stella replied. You're bearing witness. Sometimes that's all we can do for each other. That night after they hung up, Julian made a decision. He opened his laptop and began researching emergency medical services in the city, focusing on equipment shortages and technological gaps. By morning, he had outlined a new project, one that might help first responders like Stella save more lives. Neither acknowledged how the boundaries between them were shifting, how good night became increasingly difficult to say, how they'd created a shared space that existed nowhere but in the connection between their voices, a sanctuary both feared to disrupt by introducing the complications of reality. But reality, as both knew from their respective professions, had a way of asserting itself eventually. Unseen truth, the call came on a Tuesday evening, earlier than their usual time. Julian answered immediately, hearing not Stella's voice but the chaotic background of what sounded like a hospital. Julian, her voice was tight, controlled in the way he'd come to recognize meant she was holding herself together by sheer will. My brother Diego was in an accident. Hit and run while cycling. He's in surgery now. Julian gripped his phone. Which hospital? Metropolitan General. Her voice broke. I needed to hear your voice. I'm here, he promised. Whatever you need. What Stella needed but wouldn't ask for became Julian's mission. After they hung up, he made a series of calls that set wheels in motion across the city. As founder of Horizon Technologies, Julian Mercer's name opened doors and accelerated processes that would have taken days. By midnight, Diego Navarro had been transferred to a private room in Metropolitan's VIP wing. The city's top neurologist, who happened to owe Julian for venture capital that saved her medical technology startup, was personally overseeing his care. A specialist in traumatic brain injuries was flying in from Johns Hopkins by morning. Julian arranged everything without revealing his involvement to Stella, instructing hospital administration to cite insurance policy provisions when she inevitably questioned the exceptional treatment. "Something strange is happening," Stella told him during their call the following night. "Diego's getting care we definitely can't afford. Private room? Specialists I've only read about in medical journals." "That's fortunate," Julian said carefully. "The system occasionally works." Stella's silence told him she wasn't convinced. "I've worked in that hospital for 7 years. The system doesn't just work like this." He changed the subject, asking about Diego's condition, relieved when she reported significant improvement. The specialist had identified bleeding that others had missed, intervention that might have saved Diego from permanent damage. What Julian couldn't share was how deeply Stella's crisis had affected him, how hearing her vulnerable had awakened protective instincts he didn't know he possessed, how using his resources to help her felt more meaningful than any of his business accomplishments. Meanwhile, Stella found herself in an impossible situation. Her paramedic's salary could never cover the extraordinary care Diego was receiving. Yet when she attempted to discuss financial arrangements, hospital administrators deflected with vague references to arrangements already in place. Her suspicions grew when Diego's physical therapist mentioned that the foundation had arranged for equipment to be delivered to Stella's apartment once Diego was discharged. When she asked which foundation, the therapist looked confused, checking her tablet before saying, "I believe it's the Horizon Health Initiative." That night, Stella performed a search she should have done weeks ago. Horizon Technologies revealed pages of results about the privacy software giant and its reclusive founder, Julian Mercer, whose face in the few available photos made her heart stop. She recognized something in his eyes, a gentle intensity that matched the voice she'd grown to depend on. Everything suddenly made sense. His vague descriptions of work, his flexible schedule, his reluctance to meet in person. When her phone rang at their usual time, Stella answered with uncharacteristic formality. "Were you ever going to tell me who you really are?" The silence confirmed her suspicions before Julian spoke. "I wanted to be just a person to you, not a portfolio. So you let me ramble about my rent struggles while you probably spend that much on coffee? Stella and Diego's miracle treatment? That was you, wasn't it?" Julian didn't deny it. "I had the means to help." "Wouldn't you have done the same?" The question disarmed her, because of course she would have. That was the problem. Julian had exposed the uncomfortable truth about their different worlds. What was an extraordinary intervention for her was a simple phone call for him. "I don't know how to do this anymore," Stella admitted. "Every conversation we've had feels compromised now." "Nothing between us has changed," Julian insisted. "I'm still the same person who's listened to you for months." "But you're not, don't you see?" Stella's voice cracked. "You've had all the power all along. You knew that if anything went wrong in my life, you could fix it with your billions. That's not friendship or whatever this is. It's charity." The word hung between them, sharp and accusatory. "That's not how I see you," Julian said quietly. "How can we know that for sure?" Stella asked. "We need to take a break." "I need to think." After they hung up, Stella stood on her balcony watching the city lights. In the distance, she could see the gleaming Horizon Tower where Julian likely sat in his penthouse, looking out at the same skyline from a very different vantage point. The truth had created distance that their voices alone could no longer bridge. Face to face. For 2 weeks, silence stretched between them. Julian respected Stella's request for space, though every night at 11 he found himself staring at his phone, fighting the urge to call her. He threw himself into work, finalizing the emergency medical technology initiative he'd begun after learning about her profession. Stella focused on Diego's recovery, grateful for his progress while uncomfortable with its privileged nature. She missed Julian with an intensity that surprised her. Not his resources, but his perspective, his quiet humor, the way he listened as if her words were precious. On the 15th day of their separation, Stella received an official-looking envelope from Horizon Technologies. Inside was an invitation to the launch of the First Responder Tech Initiative, a program providing cutting-edge equipment to emergency medical services across the city. A handwritten note accompanied it. This project began the night you told me about losing that teenage patient. His life mattered. Your work matters. If you want nothing else to do with me, I understand. But please come see what your influence has created. Stella stood in her apartment, invitation trembling in her hand. She recognized Julian's attempt to show her that their connection had transcended their differences, that she had changed his world as much as he had impacted hers. The event was held at Metropolitan General's Conference Center. Stella arrived wearing the one formal dress she owned, feeling conspicuously underdressed among executives in designer attire. She lingered at the periphery, watching Julian from across the room as he spoke with hospital administrators. In person, he was both familiar and surprising. Taller than she'd imagined, with the same thoughtful expression she'd heard in his voice. She noticed how he stood slightly apart from groups, how his smile appeared genuine but cautious. The social anxiety he'd mentioned during their calls was visible in his body language. When he finally saw her, the transformation in his expression made her breath catch. Relief, joy, and apprehension played across his features as he made his way toward her. "You came," he said, his voice immediately recognizable despite the background noise. "The invitation was intriguing," Stella replied, attempting lightness she didn't feel. Julian gestured toward a quieter hallway, and they stepped away from the crowd. In the relative privacy, the carefully maintained distance between them seemed to collapse. "I've missed your voice," Julian admitted. "I've missed yours too," Stella said. "But Julian, this doesn't solve our fundamental problem. You live in a world where you can create foundations and initiatives on a whim. I live in a world where I have to check my bank account before ordering takeout." Julian considered this. "Do you know what I've realized these past 2 weeks? Money solved Diego's medical problems, yes, but it couldn't solve my most urgent problem, that you weren't in my life anymore." Stella felt her resistance weakening. "That's a pretty line." "It's not a line. Before you, I used my resources to keep people at a distance. With you, I used them to try to bridge it." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd never been able to picture before. "I know it was wrong not to tell you who I was. For once, I wanted to be valued for something other than what I could provide." "I never asked you for anything," Stella reminded him. "Exactly." Julian's eyes held hers. "You're the only person in my adult life who's wanted nothing from me but conversation." "Do you have any idea how extraordinary that is?" A hospital administrator approached, clearly intending to pull Julian back to the event. He politely but firmly waved them away. "We can't ignore reality," Stella said once they were alone again. "Your world and mine don't overlap." "They already have," Julian countered. "For months, every night at 11, our worlds became the same world. The question isn't whether it's possible. We've proven it is. The question is whether you're willing to try meeting in the middle." Stella looked at him, really looked at the man behind the fortune and reputation. She saw the same vulnerability that had drawn her to his voice, now visible in his eyes. "I can't promise anything," she said finally, "but maybe we could start with coffee. In person this time." Julian's smile was like sunrise. "I know a place where they don't serve anything that costs more than $5. Will that help with the balance of power?" Stella laughed despite herself. "It's a start." As they rejoined the event, maintaining a professional distance while exchanging glances that suggested anything but, both recognized the challenge ahead. Their connection had begun in the abstract realm of disembodied voices. Now they would have to discover if it could survive in the concrete reality of their disparate lives. Beyond World 6 months later, Stella's apartment had become their favorite meeting place. Despite Julian's wealth, they both preferred the authentic comfort of her modest space to the sterile luxury of his penthouse. Tonight they sat on her balcony sharing takeout as the sun set over the city. The emergency response app launches next week, Julian said, watching Stella's reaction carefully. The application, developed with extensive input from working paramedics, would revolutionize how first responders communicated with hospitals during transit. The trial run saved 13 minutes on cardiac cases, Stella replied, pride evident in her voice. After initial reluctance, she had eventually agreed to consult on the project, bringing practical expertise that Julian's developers lacked. Their path to this comfortable companionship had not been smooth. The first months of navigating their relationship in person revealed complications their phone calls had obscured. Julian struggled with public settings where his recognition often disrupted their time together. Stella battled insecurity when confronted with the extremes of his wealth. Their first real fight erupted when Julian, attempting to be thoughtful, had her building's unreliable elevator modernized without consulting her. "You can't just fix every inconvenience in my life," she had shouted. "It makes me feel like a charity project." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a crisis at Metropolitan. A major traffic accident had overwhelmed the emergency department, and Stella had called Julian from the chaos. Instead of offering financial solutions, he had arrived personally with coffee for her team and an extra set of hands to help move supplies. He had worked alongside her for hours, following directions, witnessing the raw reality of her world without attempting to control it. That night, exhausted in the hospital parking lot, something fundamental had shifted between them. "I understand now," Julian had told her. "Your work isn't about what you lack or need. It's about who you are." Now, months later, they had established a relationship built on mutual respect rather than rescue. Julian had learned to offer support without overwhelming. Stella had learned to accept his generosity when appropriate without feeling diminished. "Diego's physical therapist says he might be able to race again next season," Stella mentioned. Refilling their glasses, Julian smiled. Her brother, initially suspicious of the rich guy with the obvious agenda, had eventually become Julian's unlikely ally. Diego understood better than most how Stella's fierce independence sometimes worked against her. "I've been thinking," Julian said, setting down his fork. "The lease on this building is expiring soon." Stella tensed, anticipating another well-intentioned overreach. "I know. Rent's going up 20%. What if we found a place together?" Julian suggested cautiously. "Not my penthouse. Something new. Something that could be ours." Stella studied his face. "You'd leave your security fortress for a regular apartment?" "I'd leave it for a home," Julian corrected. "With you." The proposal represented more than changing addresses. It meant creating a space that honored both their worlds, a middle ground where neither would feel like a visitor in the other's reality. "We'd need some ground rules," Stella said, her heart racing. "No extravagant renovations without discussion. No surprise helicopters on the roof." "That happened once," Julian protested with a laugh. "And it was an emergency." "A sushi craving is not an emergency," Stella countered. But she was smiling too. As night fell over the city, they discussed possibilities. A brownstone in her neighborhood, perhaps, or a loft in the arts district. Something with character but good security, with space for Diego to stay during his ongoing recovery. Later, as they stood at her door, saying goodnight, Julian still maintained his separate residence. Stella realized how far they had come from that first misdial. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd gotten the number right that night?" she asked. Julian considered this. "I believe we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are inevitable." "That's surprisingly romantic for a data security expert," Stella teased. "You've been a terrible influence," he replied, pulling her close as they kissed goodnight. Both understood that the journey ahead would continue to challenge them. Their different worlds would never fully merge, nor should they. Julian would always navigate the complexities of extreme wealth and public scrutiny. Stella would always be drawn to the front lines of emergency care, yet they had created something unique between those worlds, a space where both could exist authentically, where neither had to diminish to accommodate the other. In that space, they had discovered a truth more valuable than fortune or status, that love doesn't require identical worlds, merely the courage to build bridges between them.